Hello and welcome back to the game room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love? Talking about games. And it seems like a lot of people these days who cover games seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 3,935 of you beautiful people checking out this video here today. We are 65 subscribers away from 4,000. We might hit it this month, people. I'm so incredibly grateful for all of you. Thank you all so much for tuning in week to week, subscribing, leaving all the great comments. I love hearing from all of you guys. I love hearing you guys talk about what we're doing here, and it's great. So thank you all so much. Now, this week we are back to the Xbox 360. I have 10 new games to take a look at. A couple of ones I've talked about in the past, as well as I actually watched The Last of Us TV show, the first season. Now, I won't talk about it now, but I know it's in the news because they released the trailer for Last of Us Season 2, which is going to be interesting. But if you're interested in knowing my thoughts on that, stay tuned to the end of the video where I'll touch base on that as well. But that's not why you're here. Right now, we're checking out 10 more Xbox 360 games you should check out. There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
Alright, starting off, we're taking a look at a game that is a RTS and also a console RTS that was a sequel, but I was not familiar with any of these games, really. The only Lord of the Rings games I knew of were the beat-em-up ones, and then the War in the North game, which I never picked up, but I did cover a few months back and really enjoyed it. Well, Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth 2 is a very cool game. It has 2 campaigns associated with it, so you can either play as the Fellowship, or not the Fellowship, but you can play as the elves, the humans, the good guys, or you actually can play as the bad guys. And it allows you 2 separate campaigns. So, you're taking out the Greyhavens, or you're taking out Galadriel's fortress, which thankfully this takes place before Rings of Power was a thing, because if that had been the case back then, she probably would have one-shotted the whole team with one blow of her sword. Overall, the game is pretty damn solid. I'm not the best player when it comes to RTS games. I really cut my teeth with them back with Command and Conquer on the N64. And even back in the day, a game like Herzog Zwei, which really is sort of the progenitor to the RTS, I wasn't that great at. I played League of Legends a little bit, was never that great at it. It just gets to the point of where I like the pausing aspect of these kind of games. That's why I gravitate more towards tactical RPGs or things like Unicorn Overlord, where you can pause your units in real time to think about it. Versus these games, you'll have your forces out, away from your base, and then suddenly your base starts getting assaulted, so you better start sending people back, but by the time you can realize that's happening, or you think to do that, your base is destroyed. Anyways, this is an RTS game. It is heavily inspired from the movies. It uses the same soundtrack. It follows the story. I don't know if it has the same voice actors, but the models of the characters look like them. So they had Hugo Weaving in there as Elrond. It looked like Elrond. All in all, this is one of the ones that jumped up around $40, I want to say, though now you can probably find it for around 20-ish, which is what I got it for. And if you like the Lord of the Rings, if you like RTS games, and especially one that works on the 360, as these almost always are better on the PC, but this was a solid game. This is one, it's not a genre I love, but as someone who is open to playing all games, this is one that I could sit down and play. And with the fact that there's 2 different campaigns, it gives you that option to see that alternative universe where the bad guys won. And that's fun, as well as I'm sure there's a scouring of the Shire level or some things that were left out of the movie that might actually be dramatized in this game. Now, this is one that was recommended to me by you guys. I honestly had seen this game before and had zero interest in it. It's a game based on a survival television show, which I wish it was dual survival, because that show was amazing. Which, by the way, if you ever watch that show, the first 2 seasons are on DVD, and they're incredibly expensive. After season 3, the show kind of dropped off, in my opinion, because Cody and Joe were the best. Or not Cody and Dave, not Joe. Joe was the guy. Joe was all right. Anyways, the game is Man vs. Wild with Bear Grylls. Hear me out, because that's what I thought when it was recommended in the comments. It's a 5-stage platformer survival game, and you drop down, and there's little mini games throughout the levels, so where you can pick grubs to eat, or you can climb different walls, or you can, but there is a survival aspect to it, so you need to keep your guy dry, so if you fall in the water, you can get to a fire pit. You have to keep your guy fed. If they're thirsty, you have to drink water. And then you have to also go out and hunt resources. And then make your way through the different biomes, which are the levels. Now, it's not a great game by any means, but this is a game that you truly can find for $5 to $10. Although it's gone up. I mean, on price charting, it shows it's like around $11. But I got this for maybe $6 at my game store. I mean, no one's looking for a Man vs. Wild game. But it's Bear Grylls, and it's fun. It's a dumb fun experience. I didn't get super deep into it, but really you find these mini games, and it's kind of cool. And if you like those survival type television shows, yeah, this is a deeper game than I expected to be. It's competent, and it's kind of enjoyable. So one that I would actually recommend. Yeah, grab it if it looks interesting. Grab it. It's fun. You know, it's an essence of those times with Bear Grylls and Survivor Man, and like I said, dual survival, which I miss to this day. All right, so this is one that I've talked about before, but I never actually picked it up and played it outside of the brief time I played it back in, I want to say 2005, when I was in college and my buddy had an Xbox 360. One of the things about the 360 coming out, one of their big gets was when they bought Rare. And when they bought Rare, it was like, this was when Rare was still a kingmaker. And the new Perfect Dark was coming out on the 360. And this is Perfect Dark Zero. And yes, I do have the collector's Steelbook edition, which luckily this isn't that expensive. You can find it just like the regular version. They're still, I think, $10 to $20. I think that jumped for a bit, but it came back down. But it literally looks and plays like an N64 game. I was kind of shocked at how much it reminded me of the visuals of the N64, everything GoldenEye, everything Perfect Dark related. Even down to the sound effects. When you put the silencer on the pistol, it sounds like the silenced pistol from GoldenEye. The weapons, and this is all a good thing in my opinion. I really enjoyed all of that. As someone who loves the N64, loves GoldenEye, I was down for it completely. We're far enough removed from the graphics really mattering for myself that I can see why maybe when the game came out, didn't necessarily look all that next gen. It looked worse in some opinions to what you got on PS2. Like, I kept seeing a mix of time splitters and then really true N64 graphics. There's co-op possibilities, but they've added a new secondary character versus in the first Perfect Dark, you could go in co-op, but you were just doubles of Joanna Dark. Now there's a new character, and I know they just announced that they're doing a reboot of it. I'm sure that in 2025 is going to be amazing. How could it go wrong? But this game is solid. This game is pretty damn fun. It's not perfect. It is, it's not a great first-person experience. But if you're looking for something that bridges that gap from an older first-person game to more of the modern ones, give this one a shot. And it still does the things that the original Perfect Dark did so well, where you have the secondary functions on guns, things like the laptop gun turning into a sentry gun, and little cool things like that Perfect Dark got so well. Just in my opinion, I didn't like the futuristic setting all that much, and I still feel that way with this game too. There's other games that do it better, in my opinion, things like Fear. But anyways, that is one to check out, because it really is crazy how much it looks like an N64 game. Alright, because we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here, this is a game I picked up in a lot, either when I got Import Tuner, or one of the other lots I got where I found games cheap, and it came with other games in it. And that is The Sims 3. I've always avoided Sims games on console. As much as I am an anti-PC Master Race person, The Sims is a game that has to be played on the PC. There's just too much pointing and clicking, switching between time of day, switching between characters, going for the house, building the house. So I just wanted to see how the hell would this play on a console, as well as every game that came out since The Sims is the same game in my opinion. I remember playing Sims 1 versus Sims 2. I can't remember what the differences were. And then playing Sims 3. The only thing I feel like they ever changed is the lineage. So now your Sims die eventually, and then they can pass on genes to new characters. They've made the relationship integrating more robust, as far as your characters can talk about what they like now instead of just generically talking to another person. But outside of that, it's the same basic formula, which is kind of amazing to me, that they really have not changed it all that much. You still have to get enough friends, build up your career that way, build talent points. And it's not an enjoyable way to play it on console, in my opinion. I had a good time. I thought it was decent enough, and I'm not a big fan of character creators, so I just randomized and then assigned them as brothers and this and that. But still, a decent enough representation of The Sims. Like, it definitely, if you want a Sims experience, you can get it on the 360. And with all of the improvements they have added, if you aren't super familiar with the original release, then this one is cool. The fact that it lets you do so much. Though, at the same time, something as stupid as, oh, let's pick up the newspaper, find a job, and then the newspaper's in that Sim's inventory. How do you get the newspaper out of the inventory so another Sim can go and get a job? I don't know, which is also funny because you have things like going in the newspaper to find a job. Oh, wow, I didn't think this game was so dated, but I guess it is. All right, moving on from that. One of the more obvious ones that I just haven't talked about, but you got to talk about everything here. I'm going to mention Call of Duty Black Ops. I've been working my way through the different Call of Duties. This one was the last one I bought myself that I was very hyped for. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, bought me Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, but even then I was tired on the series. The big hook for Black Ops was that they, much like World at War, introduced zombies. Black Ops introduced this twin-stick shooter game that, this was before I was really familiar with Smash TV, but it's basically a Smash TV clone, Xeno Crisis, those things where you're in a square, you fight off all these different enemies, and then you move into a new room. So that was kind of the cool side mini-game they introduced in Black Ops. Campaign was very solid. If I remember, it took place during the kind of the 60s Cold War era. Fun, just as fun as the other ones. Multiplayer is when I started tailing off on it. But campaign is fun, and that minigame is fun as well. So one that's still worth picking up. And the Black Ops, they're on Black Ops 6 now. It's kind of crazy. Alright, I finally finished rounding out the Fear series. We took a look finally at Fear 3. So I thought there'd be a big drop-off after beating Fear and then going back to Fear 3, because this is the one that a lot of people kind of say is not that great. It was fine. It definitely is not as good as the first Fear, in my opinion. Now the graphics are better. All of the intangibles look nicer. But this is when the story is way off the rails. You're some crazy supernatural being. It's not necessarily as disturbing as the first one was. There's the ability now to run into corpses that you can then disintegrate, and then there's a big weird story, not quite sure where it's going, but it plays much closer to Fear 2, so you don't have the health system. Now you're back to what all shooters do these days, where you can take a certain amount of damage before you die. Otherwise, if you hide, then it comes back. But really, just not as good as Fear 2, but it also had it broke down. I think there was more of a multiplayer focus too on the beginning, where it was kind of like you could do campaign or multiplayer. Like, that's just what happened, guys. Like, in the 2010, 2013 time frame, multiplayer exploded so hard that you would start seeing these games go, and where they had traditionally been focused on campaigns, they just went focusing more towards the multiplayer experience and then bolted on a campaign. That's why it was strange when like a game like Doom 2016 came out and they had such a phenomenal campaign, and then a multiplayer that people just didn't care that much for. All right, next game we're talking about here is one that I have talked about before, but I actually played it this time. This is a game that was recommended by Metal Jesus back in the day. It's on the PS3 and the 360. Though the 360 and PS3 versions are actually different. So I've heard the 360 version's a little better, but the PS3 version has a little bit more content. But it also that depends on who you talk to. And that game is Eternal Sonata. And this is a really trippy game. The story-wise, it takes place in the dying mind of Chopin, and then you're playing as this girl who's going around, and you have all this real surrealness with music, this and that, and the names of the towns are all music. I'm not going to talk about the story. Gameplay-wise, this game made me, it felt like a warm hug going into it. As someone who likes turn-based RPGs, gets a little irritated by active combat systems, this one's got a happy marriage of it not just being your standard turn-based RPG, but it also is. So the way this one works is you get into battles, which you see them on the field, and then you get a certain amount of action points. And those action points can relate to your movement as well as to your attack. So if you stand still, you can attack more times than if you're moving. And then there's also a combo system where if you attack and you continue to attack, you'll eventually do stronger moves in that attack frame. Now, bear in mind you have to do that, because if you hit X and then you hit X, like a second later, without doing it as an obvious combo, you're just going to do the first portion of that combo, and you're going to do much less damage. Didn't get super far into this one. This is one that is starting to skyrocket. Now, I think it came down a little bit too, but one that you definitely should pick up either on the 360 or on the PS3, because it seems like it's just going to go up, because it is such a strange game, and one that I really, really did like. I mean, I think I got it when it was around $30, and now it's around $40. It's not too much, but I mean, it used to be, or maybe I got like $20. I didn't pay that much for this one. Okay, one that I've had in the collection for a long time. I've talked about it before, how I QA tested for Electronic Arts. Now, when I say QA tested, it really was more like a focus group. So I was not an employee there. They brought me in. It was through a temp agency. I was there like for a week, 2 weeks maybe. And one of the best things is when you were there, one of the employees took you to the EA store, and that's where you could get new releases that were still $60 for $20. And then sometimes they would have partner releases that weren't the full $60, but there was a discount on it. And one of those games I bought I think the second time I was there, when I was doing the Alice the Madness Returns, was Bulletstorm Epic Edition. And I bought this one with the intention of playing it co-op, and then I realized that it was online co-op. So I never opened it, because this looked like something that would have been a lot of fun for my brother and I to play, either my older or my younger brother, because at the time we were heavily invested in playing Left 4 Dead. This is sort of a ridiculous game where, as you're almost like in 50 Cent Blood on the Sand or on Body Count, where when you attack enemies in certain areas, you get these funny combos. But I still haven't opened it. And they've re-released this on modern consoles too. And it's one of those interesting scenarios where I feel like this game deserved a sequel rather than a remaster. Because at a certain point, when the remaster came out, I didn't pick it up because I still had the sealed version of this. Versus if they'd done a sequel, I probably would have bought the sequel and actually played it while it was current. Does that make any damn sense? No. But I mean, I think that's a little bit more predictable. Give us sequels, even if there isn't that much different. I would prefer a sequel than I would to a remaster almost all the time. But the seal on this one is still very crispy, and I don't know. I wanted to open it, I wanted to talk about it so I can get to it, but I just haven't. And let me know, is this one? My God, it looks like so much fun. I just can't believe I've had that thing sealed for over 10 years. And I talk about this on the 360, but then I look at my Switch collection and I'm like, my God, I have so many sealed Switch games. And is this what happened 30 years ago on the NES or the Super NES, where people in their late 30s, early 40s that were gamers would buy stuff and just not have time to play it? And then that's how you end up with these sealed copies of Chrono Trigger and whatnot that you come across here decades later. All right, last two here. So one of the games that was also recommended by you guys, which I don't know if this was a movie tie-in game. I never would have picked it up if not for your guys' recommendation. And that is Hellboy, The Science of Evil. Now, this is a local co-op game, but I only played it one player. I believe you can play as all of these different characters, but mainly you're playing as Hellboy. I don't know if that's Ron Perlman doing the voice in it, but it's very over the top. It has a vibe, it has the vibe of the Infernal Hell's Vengeance, God of War, Dante's Inferno, Darksiders, which I've talked about. And it has a thing where you gain, I guess, abilities by beating up other enemies, and then it allows you to do a special. So, for instance, you can rip the heads off of these goblin creatures and then throw them as grenades. It seems very tongue-in-cheek. It definitely has some, interesting combat. It's sort of an isometric view as well, so you don't have a complete free range of the camera. It's kind of pre-rendered angles and then not. And overall, I didn't give it that much time, but I was interested in it. I was interested in seeing where it was going. I know nothing about the Hellboy comic book. I know nothing about the movies, rather. They just didn't appeal to me all that much. But it was an interesting enough playthrough. It was a competent game. And, once again, when we're talking about all these things, these aren't great games by any means. But that is definitely one where if you like the Hellboy franchise, that's probably something you would really, really like. All right, then the last game I beat this week, the reason I wanted to beat it, actually beat it. Yeah, I actually beat it. I didn't just play it. I beat this game because people have said this is one of the greatest games ever made. And I just had to see for myself because I've heard that a lot. I've been hearing that ever since, 2012 to 2013. There's 3 games in the series, and then the company was unceremoniously shut down, which people still lambaste to this day. And that game, Bioshock. And also, this comes with a slipcover, just so you know. But yeah, I've never played any of the Bioshocks, not 1, 2, or 3, which is Infinite. And so I put it in with just the intention of, doing what I do here, where I play a little bit of it and then give my thoughts. The beginning of Bioshock is so masterfully crafted that within the first 20 minutes, you know everything. You find this underwater city. It's extremely intriguing. You're introduced to the Little Sisters and the Big Daddies. You hear from Atlas. You get a little bit of a storyline of what's going on. As well as it seems like, I think this game came out in 2007. And then a few years later, Fallout 3 came out. But then, I don't know if the Fallout 1 and 2 from the 90s also had this aesthetic. But this whole retro future aesthetic, where you're really romanticizing, the 40s and 50s, but then giving them this almost Lovecraftian steampunk technology that makes no sense. It seems like that happens a lot, and people are crazy for it. I was never that much appealed to it. I watched the Fallout TV show, and it was enjoyable enough, but if you like that vibe, that is big on Bioshock, which I think that's part of it. But also, the first level in the game, I get it. The game sets the table very, very well. However, after that, the game, in my opinion, falls off a little bit. So it's not a survival horror game. It's an action game, but it's got a little bit of scariness in it at times. And also, there's a lot of resource management that, if you don't know that going into it, can be very, very annoying. As far as I found myself constantly out of ammo, constantly out of healing equipment, always running around, and then trying to take out a big daddy early in the game is very, very tough. And then you have a moral choice if you're going to absorb the Little Sisters or if you're going to rescue them. Now, obviously, I'm going to rescue them, and I'm glad I did, because that's what gets you the good ending. But yeah, there's a little, and it's only a 10 to 12 hour game too, which that's the reason I went through and beat it. And I really, really like the game. But I always talk about, when I'm talking and reviewing games, that there's ebbs and flows with how a game goes. So the beginning of the game, massive high. And then it kind of stays there, and then it takes a severe dip, I want to say around the apiary area, where you're having to go and find all these different reagents to then cleanse the forest. And this is also if you do the good playthrough. If you do the bad playthrough, I know you get more energy faster. But yeah, then as I started getting more powerful, as I started getting more things I could rely on, learning the systems a little bit better, and also the enemies giving you more money, which also the enemies seem to... There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason behind their power level. So when you shoot them, they kind of have the Skyrim or the Oblivion health bar, and then they just die, and then you can take pictures of them. And the more pictures you take of them, the more you unlock their weaknesses. And then if you know the weakness of an enemy, say they're weak to fire, you hit them with the fire, they're done. They incinerate super fast. So maybe I should have done more on that. But for a game that came out in 2007, it reminds me so much of that slot that Half-Life 2 takes from the outside perspective looking in, that, you know, when you talk to people, say it's one of the greatest games ever made, or if they say, like, there's the Rolling Stone list that just came out that everyone was clowning on, because I don't think Bioshock was on it. And it's just one of those things where it's funny, the games that people hold in such high regard that other people completely miss, and then to look at it and see where are they seeing that from, where is that coming from, as a game that's very early on with the amount of story this had in it, I can see where that would be impressive. But also for myself, you know, there's betrayals that you can see coming from a mile away, but there's also the coolness of, wow, I'm in the club. You know, like, would you kindly tell me that like, would you kindly like and subscribe to my channel? You know, like that kind of stuff. It's cool to be in the club. I can't tell you. Maybe I've probably seen that reference, and so as far as the impact it had on the greater gaming culture and world, I want to say that's probably where the love for this comes from, more so than the actual gameplay and the actual game itself. Now, I've heard the second one drops off a bit. I've heard Infinite is amazing. But, yeah, just an interesting experience. And I typically don't actually beat the games that I'm playing during these videos. So it was nice to get that perspective, especially on something like this that, once again, from the outside looking in, it looks like it fills the slot of like a Half-Life 2. As well as, I believe it was exclusive to the 360, or at least it says it was exclusive on that, and PC as well. But anyways, that's what you get for this week as far as games go, guys. Now, as I did mention in the intro, I did watch the first season of The Last of Us, and to be honest, I thought it was an excellent adaptation, but with the fact that we get so many bad adaptations, it's kind of hard not to clear that bar. It had a lot of weirdness to it. The casting, which, you know, on paper, I thought, oh, Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal, I like both of them in Game of Thrones. I'm sure they'll be great here. I think Pedro did a much better job than Bella did. Now, he's a much more vulnerable Joel in the games and much less self-assured, in my opinion. You know, Tess kind of takes the lead in this show than he did in the games. But as far as Bella goes, Ellie is supposed to, especially in the first game, she's supposed to be not so sure of herself. She's supposed to grow. She's supposed to be a child that's basically at one point towards the end of the game is forced to grow up real fast. And with Bella, I did not feel that arc at all. Instead, she just seemed like the Mormont girl from Game of Thrones thrown into Last of Us, very tired. Let's get to me being a badass, and then, oh yeah, she's a badass. As well as they decided to adapt the DLC, which I didn't really play. And then they added the third episode as a bottle episode, which I thought was cool to see the timeline. But then it didn't make the world look all that dangerous, where in 20 years of living during this parasitic apocalypse, the only things that happened to these two homesteaders was there was one zombie that tried to attack, and then one time they tried to get attacked by some raiders. And the guy defending his property is just standing in the middle of the road, and then he gets shot, and then they end up, anyways, like, there's a lot of interesting choices that was made with this. Season 2 is coming out, and we all know there's gonna be a certain golfing moment, and it's also funny to see the actress they cast as Abby does not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is the point a lot of people complained about in the second game. And they're like, no, that's possible, but then when they cast an actress, they can't find anyone anywhere close to that. So we'll see what happens. Maybe let me know, is that something you're interested in hearing me talk about? Maybe I'll cover it for the channel. But yeah, that's my thoughts on The Last of Us TV show. I'm glad to have watched it. I actually thought it was not that great, to be honest. But as far as video game adaptations go, it was one of the better ones. But that's because I'm so used to terrible, terrible adaptations. But anyways, that's it for this week, guys. As a reminder, I release a new video every Tuesday. It's been so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.